The massive arena on Krex Prime buzzed with the roars of thousands of alien spectators. Warriors from across the galaxy had gathered for the grand tournament, where the strongest fighters would prove their worth before the Galactic Council. The air crackled with tension and the metallic scent of fear. Admiral Zex Thor towered above the crowd in his viewing box, his four arms crossed as he surveyed the contestants below. His reptilian features twisted into a sneer as he spotted something unusual among the warriors. A human. A single, small human wearing strange metal tags around his neck. What is that pathetic creature doing here? Zex Thor's voice boomed across the arena through his translator device. His question drew laughter from the other warlords in attendance. The human stood quietly in the preparation area, seemingly unbothered by the giants surrounding him. He was average height by human standards, with short brown hair and calm blue eyes. What caught everyone's attention were the two small rectangular pieces of metal hanging from a simple chain around his neck. General Vaktul, a massive insectoid warrior, clicked his mandibles in amusement. Look at those trinkets he wears. Does he think jewelry will help him in battle? More laughter erupted from the alien spectators. The tournament announcer, a floating jellyfish-like creature named Kelsan, activated the arena's sound system. Next to enter the combat ring is Marcus Chun from the planet Earth. Species classification, human. Rank listed as. There was a pause as Kelsan checked his datapad, Sergeant. The word Sergeant echoed through the arena, followed by an explosion of mocking laughter. Warlords who commanded fleets of thousands found the idea of such a low military rank participating in their tournament absolutely hilarious. A sergeant. Admiral Zex Thor roared with laughter, slapping his knee with one of his four hands. I am an admiral of the 7th Fleet. General Vaktul commands the Hive Legions. Commander Yexdal rules the Iron Worlds. And they sent us a mere sergeant. The crowd's amusement grew louder as other high-ranking officers shared their titles. Supreme Marshal Kethvin of the Crystal Empire, Fleet Admiral Noxtar of the Shadow Armada, and dozens of other commanders who ruled entire star systems. Marcus remained silent, his hands resting calmly at his sides. He made no move to defend himself against their mockery. The metal tags around his neck caught the arena lights, reflecting small glimmers across his chest. Perhaps the humans have run out of real warriors, suggested Commander Yexdal, her cybernetic implants glowing with amusement. They must be desperate to send someone so low in their hierarchy. The tournament had strict rules. Each warrior fought alone, using only personal weapons and skills. No technology beyond basic armor and traditional weapons was allowed. It was meant to test pure combat ability and tactical thinking. As Marcus walked toward the combat platform, the other contestants stepped aside, some pointing and whispering among themselves. His opponents looked like walking mountains of muscle, scales, and razor-sharp claws. Many stood twice his height and possessed natural weapons that could tear through steel. The first match was announced. Marcus would face Grokhan, a berserker from the Savage Worlds. Grokhan stood 8 feet tall, covered in natural armor plating, with arms like tree trunks and claws that could slice through metal. He had never lost a single combat in his entire life. This will be over in seconds, Admiral Zex Thor predicted, settling back to enjoy what he assumed would be quick entertainment. As the two fighters took their positions on opposite ends of the platform, the arena fell relatively quiet. Even the mockers wanted to see how quickly the human would fall. Grokhan let out a bone-chilling roar that shook the platform. He charged forward with surprising speed for his size, claws extended and ready to end the fight immediately. The ground trembled under his massive footsteps. Marcus stood perfectly still until the last possible moment. Then, with movements so fluid they seemed almost casual, he stepped aside and struck. His hand moved in a precise motion, hitting a specific point on Grokhan's neck as the alien warrior rushed past. Grokhan stumbled, then collapsed face first onto the platform with a thunderous crash that echoed throughout the arena. He tried to get up, but his body wouldn't respond properly. After a few seconds of struggling, he went completely limp. The arena fell into stunned silence. No one could believe what they had just witnessed. The unstoppable berserker had been defeated by what appeared to be a simple touch. Impossible, whispered General Vaktul, his compound eyes focusing intently on the human. Marcus helped Grok onto his feet once the paralysis wore off. The Berserker looked confused but unharmed. He stared at Marcus with newfound respect before bowing slightly and leaving the platform. The crowd's mockery had stopped completely. Whispers spread through the arena as spectators tried to understand what they had seen. The human's technique had been unlike anything in their databases. "Lucky shot," Admiral Zex Thor declared, though his voice carried less confidence than before. The next opponent will crush him properly. But Marcus had already proven something important. Those simple metal tags around his neck might represent more than anyone had realized. The human military might have different ways of measuring worth than the rest of the galaxy understood. As the second match was announced, many spectators leaned forward in their seats. The human sergeant had their attention now, even if they weren't ready to admit it. The tournament was just beginning, and already their assumptions were being challenged. Marcus checked his dog tags briefly, reading the information stamped into the metal. Information that told a story these alien warlords couldn't even begin to comprehend. Information about battles fought and won, sacrifices made, and a military tradition that valued substance over spectacle. The next opponent stepped onto the platform, and Marcus prepared himself for another demonstration of what human warriors were truly capable of. The second opponent was announced as Thurgax the Mindbreaker, a psychic warrior from the Void Nebula. Unlike Grokhan's brute force approach, Thurgax specialized in mental attacks that could drive opponents insane within seconds. His pale, elongated skull pulsed with visible veins as he prepared to assault Marcus's mind. "Now we'll see the human's true weakness," Admiral Zex Thor said with renewed confidence. "No amount of physical training can protect against psychic domination." Thurgax raised his hands, and the air around the platform shimmered with invisible energy. Other contestants in the preparation area stepped back instinctively. They had witnessed Thurgax's previous matches, where opponents had collapsed screaming, clawing at their own heads as nightmares flooded their minds. The psychic blast hit Marcus like a tsunami of terror. Images of death, failure, and loss crashed into his consciousness. Most beings would have crumpled immediately under such an assault. But Marcus had experienced something these alien warriors couldn't understand. He had already lived through hell. The visions Thurgax projected were meant to break him. Burning cities, fallen comrades, impossible missions with no hope of success. But for Marcus, these weren't nightmares. They were memories he had already processed and overcome. He had learned to carry the weight of loss without letting it destroy him. Instead of fighting the psychic attack, Marcus did something unexpected. He opened his mind completely, letting Thurgax see everything. The alien found himself experiencing Marcus's actual memories, holding a dying friend in a bombed-out building, making impossible decisions to save civilians, leading rescue missions into hostile territory, knowing some of his team wouldn't return. But Thurgax also saw something else: how Marcus had found meaning in those experiences, how he had learned to honor the fallen by continuing to fight for those who remained, how he had transformed pain into purpose and loss into determination. The psychic warrior stumbled backward, his own mental defenses overwhelmed by the sheer depth of human emotional resilience. He had expected fear and weakness. Instead, he found strength forged in the crucible of sacrifice and refined by years of service. Marcus walked calmly across the platform as Thurgax struggled to break their mental connection. When he reached the alien warrior, he placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "It's okay," Marcus said quietly. "The memories don't have to control you. They can make you stronger if you let them." For the first time in his life, Thurgax felt peace in his mind. The constant noise of psychic feedback that had plagued him since childhood went quiet. He looked at Marcus with something approaching awe before conceding the match. The arena erupted in confused chatter. Two victories, both achieved through methods that defied conventional understanding. The alien spectators were beginning to realize they might be witnessing something extraordinary. General Vactol's mandibles clicked nervously. "What kind of training produces such mental fortitude?" he muttered to his aide. The third match brought Ch-Tar, the weapons master, a four-armed warrior who wielded energy blades with lethal precision. She had studied combat forms from 1,000 worlds and mastered techniques that had taken centuries to perfect. Surely this human cannot match pure skill, Commander Yexdal observed, though her cybernetic implants were analyzing Marcus's previous matches for any exploitable patterns. CH-Tar began with a spectacular display of sword work, her four blades moving in complex patterns that created a web of deadly energy. Her technique was flawless, each movement flowing into the next with mechanical precision. Marcus drew a simple combat knife from his belt, standard military issue, nothing fancy. The contrast was almost comical, for advanced energy weapons against one basic blade. But, as the fight progressed, something remarkable became apparent. While CH-Tar's techniques were perfect, they were also predictable. She had memorized thousands of combat forms, but Marcus had lived through thousands of real battles. Every move CH-Tar made was textbook perfect, but Marcus had learned to read opponents in life-or-death situations where textbooks didn't matter. He began to anticipate her attacks, not through memorized patterns, but through subtle cues in her breathing, stance, and eye movements. The fight became a dance of adaptation versus perfection. CH-Tar executed flawless combinations that should have been unstoppable, but Marcus improvised responses that hadn't been written in any manual. Where she relied on memorized techniques, he relied on experience and intuition. The crowd watched in fascination as the human gradually began to control the pace of the fight. He wasn't faster or stronger than CH-Tar, but he was reading the battle like a book she hadn't written. In the end, Marcus didn't defeat CH-Tar through superior technique. He won by understanding something she had never learned. That real combat was about adapting to chaos, not executing perfect forms. He caught her blade with his bare hand at a moment when her programming told her victory was certain, then placed his knife at her throat. CH-Tar stared at him in wonder. "How did you know I would attack that way?" "Because you're thinking like a machine," Marcus replied respectfully. "But real fights aren't programmed. They're survived. 3 victories." The arena had gone from mocking laughter to respectful silence. The alien warlords were beginning to understand that they had seriously misjudged this human warrior. Admiral Zextor's confidence was shaken, but he still had one card to play. The human has been lucky so far, but the final match will test his true worth. He faces supreme champion Vorthak, undefeated for 200 years. Vorthak was a legend among galactic warriors. Standing 12 feet tall, with natural armor plating and weapons built into his very bones, he had never met an opponent he couldn't crush. He ruled the tournament arena like a god of war. As Vorthak entered the platform, the ground shook with each step. His roar echoed through the arena, causing some spectators to cover their ears. This was power incarnate, the ultimate expression of galactic military might. Marcus touched his dog tags again, feeling the worn metal under his fingers. The tags told a story of service, sacrifice, and earned respect. They represented something these aliens were only beginning to understand. That true strength wasn't measured by size or rank, but by the willingness to stand up when others needed protection. The final battle was about to begin, and both the arena and the galaxy would learn what human determination really meant. Supreme Champion Vorthak circled the platform like a predator sizing up prey. His massive form cast long shadows across the combat arena, and his breath came out in visible puffs of superheated air. For 2 centuries, he had dominated these tournaments without a single defeat. "Little human," Vorthak's voice rumbled like distant thunder. "I have crushed warriors from 1,000 worlds. Your tricks will not work against raw power." The spectators leaned forward in anticipation. This match would determine whether the human's previous victories had been skill or simply luck. Against Vorthak's overwhelming might, there seemed to be no room for clever tactics or psychological warfare. Marcus studied his opponent carefully. Vorthak was everything the previous fighters hadn't been: pure, overwhelming force with centuries of battle experience. His natural armor could deflect energy weapons, his strength could crush vehicles, and his speed belied his massive size. But Marcus had faced impossible odds before. He thought about the evacuation of New Kandahar, where he and 12 soldiers had held off an army for 6 hours while civilians escaped. He remembered the siege of Port Darwin, where his unit had been outnumbered 50-1, but still completed their mission. Vorthak charged without warning, his massive fists swinging with enough force to shatter stone. The platform cracked under his feet as he closed the distance between them in seconds. His first punch would have caved in a tank. Marcus didn't try to block or dodge completely. Instead, he did something that defied logic. He moved toward the attack, slipping inside Vorthak's guard at the exact moment when the champion's momentum made him vulnerable. The champion's fist passed inches from Marcus's head as the human drove his elbow into a gap between armor plates. It wasn't a powerful blow, but it hit a nerve cluster that momentarily disrupted Vorthak's balance. Using the champion's own momentum against him, Marcus guided the massive warrior's charge into the platform wall. Vorthak crashed into the barrier with tremendous force, sending cracks spiderwebbing through the reinforced material. But Vorthak was far from finished. He spun around with a roar of fury, his tail whipping toward Marcus like a battering ram. The human rolled under the attack and came up behind his opponent, looking for another opening. The battle became a deadly dance of physics and timing. Vorthak possessed overwhelming power, but Marcus understood leverage and momentum in ways that 2 centuries of victories hadn't taught the champion. Every attack the giant made, Marcus found ways to redirect or use against him. The crowd watched in stunned silence as the massive champion began to show signs of frustration. His attacks were becoming wilder, less controlled. He had never faced an opponent who turned his own strength into a weapon against him. Impossible, General Vaktul whispered. How was he doing this? Admiral Zexthor stood up in his viewing box, his 4 arms gesticulating wildly. That human is making Vorthak look like an amateur. But Marcus was beginning to tire. Each dodge required perfect timing, and one mistake would be fatal. Vorthak's endurance was legendary. He could fight for days without rest. The human needed to end this quickly. That's when Marcus made a decision that shocked everyone in the arena. Instead of continuing to evade, he suddenly stood perfectly still in the center of the platform. What are you doing, human? Vorthak demanded, suspicious of this apparent surrender. Marcus reached up and grasped his dog tags, holding them out for Vorthak to see. These tell my story, he said quietly. They tell who I really am. Vorthak approached cautiously, intrigued despite himself. The arena fell completely silent as Marcus began to speak. My name is Marcus Chun, serial number 2847 Delta 9, United Earth Forces 3rd Infantry Division. These tags say I'm a sergeant, and you all laughed at that rank. The champion stopped a few feet away, his massive head tilted slightly as he listened. But what you don't understand, Marcus continued, his voice carrying clearly through the arena's silence, is that I wasn't promoted to sergeant because I was the best fighter or the smartest tactician or the strongest warrior. He looked directly into Vorthak's eyes. I became a sergeant because when the mission was impossible, when the odds were hopeless, when everyone else had given up, I was the one who stayed. I was the one who found a way. I was the one who brought my people home. The metal tags caught the light as Marcus held them higher. These represent every soldier who trusted me with their lives. Every civilian I helped evacuate from burning cities. Every time someone needed protection, and I stood between them and harm. Vorthak's expression began to change. For the first time in centuries, he was seeing something beyond physical combat. You want to know what real strength is? Marcus asked. It's not about how hard you can hit or how much you can lift. It's about standing up when everything tells you to stay down. It's about protecting others when you'd rather run. It's about doing what's right even when it costs you everything. The champion lowered his massive fist slowly. Around the arena, alien spectators were beginning to understand something they had never considered before. Your dog tags, Vorthak said quietly, his voice filled with sudden respect. They speak of honor. Marcus nodded. Every human who wears them has earned that honor. Not through conquest or domination, but through service, through sacrifice, through the willingness to put others before ourselves. The silence in the arena was absolute. 2 warriors faced each other, one massive and powerful, one small and determined. But the true measure of their worth was finally becoming clear to everyone watching. Supreme Champion Vorthak stood motionless for long moments, processing what he had just heard. Around the arena, the alien spectators waited in tense silence. This was not how tournament matches were supposed to end. Tell me about your wars, Sergeant Chun, Vorthak said finally, his voice carrying a tone of genuine curiosity rather than mockery. Marcus looked around the arena, seeing thousands of alien faces staring down at him. These were warriors and warlords who ruled through strength and fear. But perhaps it was time they learned about a different kind of warfare. Our wars aren't fought for conquest. Marcus began, his voice steady and clear. We don't fight to expand territory or gather resources. We fight to protect the innocent and preserve freedom for those who can't fight for themselves. Admiral Zexthor leaned forward in his viewing box. This was not what he had expected from a supposedly primitive human military. I fought in the Kepler colony evacuation, Marcus continued. Pirates had blockaded the system, cutting off all escape routes. 30,000 civilians were trapped on a dying world, and no one could get past the blockade. The arena remained completely silent as Marcus spoke. My unit volunteered for suicide mission. We would attack the blockade head-on, drawing their fire while evacuation ships escaped through the chaos. We knew most of us wouldn't survive. Vorthak's massive frame seemed to shrink slightly as he absorbed this information. And did you succeed? 27,000 civilians escaped, Marcus said quietly. We lost 60% of our forces, but we saved those families. That's why I wear these tags. Not because I'm the strongest or the fastest, but because when people needed protection, we answered the call. General Vaktul clicked his mandibles thoughtfully. Your military promotes based on sacrifice, not just victory. Leadership isn't about commanding from safety, Marcus explained. It's about standing at the front when the fighting starts. It's about making the hard decisions that keep your people alive. Every promotion I've received came because I was willing to take risks that others couldn't. Commander Yexdal's cybernetic implants whirred as she processed this information. But surely you must have conquered enemies? Taken territory? Marcus shook his head. We've defeated aggressors, yes. But after the fighting ends, we help rebuild. We share technology and resources. We turn enemies into allies by showing them a better way to live. The words hung in the air like a revelation. Around the arena, alien warriors who had spent their lives conquering and dominating began to see warfare from an entirely different perspective. Vorthak slowly removed his own decorations, medals, and trophies that represented 2 centuries of victories. I have won 10,000 battles, he said thoughtfully. I have conquered star systems and brought entire species to heal. But I have never saved anyone. There's still time, Marcus said gently. Strength like yours could protect millions instead of threatening them. You could be a guardian instead of a destroyer. The champion looked at his medals, then at Marcus's simple dog tags. Your rank means more than all my titles, doesn't it? Rank is just responsibility, Marcus replied. The higher you climb, the more people depend on you to make the right choices. A sergeant protects his squad. A general protects nations. But they're both servants, not masters. Around the arena, conversations began to break out as spectators discussed this radical new perspective. Admiral Zexthor found himself thinking about his own fleet, tens of thousands of soldiers under his command. Had he been leading them or simply using them? I concede this match, Vorthak announced suddenly, his voice carrying clearly through the arena. Not because you defeated me in combat, but because you have taught me something more valuable than victory. The crowd erupted in confused noise. Conceding was almost unheard of in the grand tournament, especially from an undefeated champion. But Vorthak wasn't finished. I've spent 200 years proving my strength through domination. But this human has shown me what true strength really means. I would be honored to learn more about your way of warfare, Sergeant Chun. Marcus extended his hand, and the massive champion carefully shook it. The gesture seemed small, but it represented something profound, the beginning of understanding between 2 completely different philosophies of power. The tournament announcer, Kelsan, floated nervously above the platform. This was completely unprecedented. Ladies and gentle beings, we have an unusual conclusion to this year's grand tournament. But the real conclusion was just beginning. Word of the human sergeant's victories was already spreading beyond the arena. Across the galaxy, military leaders who had ruled through fear and conquest were hearing about a different approach to strength. Some would dismiss it as weakness, but others would begin to wonder if there might be better ways to use their power. The simple metal tags around one human's neck were about to start a revolution in military thinking that would reshape the galaxy. Marcus had come to the tournament as a mockery, dismissed as a low-ranking nobody. But he was leaving as something far more dangerous to the established order. A teacher who had shown that true strength came from service, not conquest. The real battle was just beginning, and it would be fought not with weapons, but with ideas that could transform an entire civilization's understanding of what it meant to be a warrior. 6 months after the grand tournament, the galaxy was a very different place. News of the human sergeant's victories had spread like wildfire across star systems, carried by traders, diplomats, and warriors who had witnessed something extraordinary. Admiral Zexthor stood on the bridge of his flagship, staring out at a very unusual sight. His 7th Fleet, once feared throughout the sector for its aggressive conquests, was now engaged in humanitarian relief efforts on Calder's Prime. The planet had been devastated by natural disasters, and instead of exploiting their weakness, Zexthor's forces were helping rebuild. "Admiral," his aide reported, "the evacuation of the northern continent is complete. All civilians have been relocated to safe zones." Zexthor nodded, feeling something he had never experienced before. Satisfaction that came not from victory in battle, but from lives saved. He had contacted Marcus Chun 3 months ago, asking to learn more about human military philosophy. The conversations had changed everything. "Sir," another officer interrupted, "we're receiving a transmission from General Vactal's forces in the Kepler system." The main screen activated, showing the insectoid general's familiar features. Behind him, instead of the usual military formations, were construction crews rebuilding settlements that had been destroyed in previous conflicts. "Admiral," Vactal clicked with what passed for enthusiasm among his species, "our joint relief operation on New Verdant is exceeding expectations. The local population has not only welcomed our assistance, but is actively cooperating with reconstruction efforts." This was revolutionary. For centuries, the appearance of military fleets had meant conquest and subjugation. Now, many species were learning to see armed forces as potential protectors rather than threats. "Any word from Commander Yexdal?" Zexthor asked. "She's established the first interspecies military academy on Harmony Station," Vactal reported. "Officers from 40 different worlds are learning about human military doctrine." The response has been overwhelming. On Krex Prime, where the tournament had taken place, Supreme Champion Vorthak had undergone the most dramatic transformation of all. He had given up competitive fighting entirely, and now ran a training facility that taught advanced combat techniques to peacekeeping forces. The secret, Vorthak explained to a class of mixed-species officers, is not learning how to destroy more effectively, but learning when destruction is necessary and when it isn't. "Sergeant Shin taught me that the greatest victories come from battles you don't have to fight." His students, former warlords, pirates, and mercenaries, listened intently. Many had come seeking to learn the mysterious human combat techniques that had defeated the legendary champion. They stayed to learn about something much more valuable. Meanwhile, Marcus Chun himself had become something of a galactic celebrity, though he tried to avoid the attention. He had returned to Earth briefly, but was now serving as a military advisor to the newly formed Galactic Peacekeeping Alliance. The requests keep coming in, his aide informed him as they reviewed the day's communications. The Rigel Confederacy wants help restructuring their entire military hierarchy. The Vegan Assembly is asking for assistance in converting their conquest fleet into a defense force. Marcus looked tired, but determined. Set up meetings with their command staff. But remember, we can't force change on anyone. They have to transform their own military culture. This was perhaps the most important lesson the galaxy was learning. Real change couldn't be imposed from outside. It had to come from within, from leaders who recognized that there were better ways to use their strength. Not everyone was embracing the new philosophy. On the Outer Rim, several warlords had banded together to form the traditional order, rejecting what they called human weakness and attempting to maintain the old ways of conquest and domination. "They'll learn eventually," Marcus said when briefed about the resistance. "Change is never easy, especially for those who benefited from the old system. But they're fighting against an idea whose time has come." The resistance was indeed struggling. As more worlds adopted the human approach to military service, the traditional order found fewer and fewer targets for their aggression. Planets that had once been vulnerable were now protected by reformed fleets that fought not for glory, but for genuine defense. One of the most significant changes was in how military rank was perceived across the galaxy. The old system that valued titles and conquest above all else was giving way to a new understanding that respected service and sacrifice. Young officers throughout the galaxy began wearing simple identification tags similar to human dog tags, not as mimicry, but as symbols of their commitment to service over self. The tags became known as honor marks, and wearing them was considered a pledge to use one's strength for protection rather than conquest. On Earth, military academies received thousands of applications from alien species wanting to learn human military doctrine. The integration wasn't always smooth. Different species had vastly different concepts of honor and duty, but the fundamental principles of service, sacrifice, and protection proved universal. We're not trying to make everyone human, Marcus explained to a gathering of galactic military leaders. We're trying to help everyone become the best version of their own species. Strength guided by wisdom. Power tempered by compassion. Force used only when necessary to protect the innocent. As Marcus finished his speech, he looked out at the assembled officers, beings from dozens of worlds who had once been enemies or strangers. Many wore honor marks now, simple tags that represented their commitment to a new way of thinking about military service. The galaxy still faced challenges. There would always be those who chose conquest over cooperation, who preferred fear to respect. But something fundamental had shifted. The simple dog tags of one human sergeant had sparked a revolution that was transforming military culture across thousands of worlds. In the end, the most powerful weapon in the galaxy hadn't been a superweapon or an invincible fleet. It had been an idea, the revolutionary concept that true strength came from protecting others rather than dominating them. And that idea, once planted, proved impossible to destroy. The warlords had mocked his rank, but the dog tags had spoken. They had told a story of service, sacrifice, and strength that resonated across species and star systems. They had reminded the galaxy that the greatest victories were not those won on battlefields, but those won in the hearts and minds of those brave enough to choose a better path. Marcus touched his dog tags one more time, feeling their familiar weight. They were just pieces of metal, but they represented something eternal, the willingness of ordinary people to do extraordinary things when others needed protection. That spirit, it turned out, was not uniquely human after all. It existed throughout the galaxy, waiting to be awakened.